Today, I want to speak with you about creating boundaries when you're networking with the opposite sex. So this is for you, whether you're male or female. Now, fundamentally, everything I'm going to say is underpinned by this basic fact that it's all about your conduct. So pay attention to your conduct while you're working to build your networks, to make sure that you're doing the right things and not portraying the wrong kind of persona outward to the circles you're engaging with. The first thing you want to pay attention to when you're networking with the opposite sex is that you want to watch your talk. So try to avoid inappropriate jokes, innuendo, suggestive statements that can convey something that is totally unwarranted in what is a professional business setting. Pay attention to that. When you're trying to build networks, you don't want to become known as that person who always has the dirty joke or the suggestive remark to make. You want people to know you as somebody who every time he opens his mouth or her mouth is speaking core industry information or some other valuable insight that is a benefit to both the person listening as well as the person that is speaking. The next thing I want to say is this. While trying to build networks with the opposite sex, please pay attention to distancing. I know COVID has also put us in the place of social distancing, but beyond COVID, think about it. Respect the physical boundaries and the physical spaces. Don't get too close to people that you're interacting with. I'm sure many of us have had the experience where some people are just kind of in our faces, and even as we keep moving back to create room, a comfortable room for ourselves, they just continue to edge in. So whatever you do, please don't be that person. Right alongside the issue of maintaining physical boundaries is being careful not to be inappropriately touchy-feely. What do I mean by this? I tell you what, from personal experience, I've seen, for instance, cases where sometimes just because the guy is sitting beside you and he's trying to explain something to you, he's busy, he's touching your hands, he's touching even your thighs. And this is totally inappropriate. Whether the person beside you is a married man or married woman is totally inappropriate. In business settings, professional settings, if you're a lady, you also want to ask yourself, for instance, why do you want to have full frontal hugs with some guy that you don't know in the name of trying to build rapport and familiarity? Because I suspect that you probably don't want to see your husband or significant other in those nice frontal hugs with some other lady. So we need to think through these things. Something that you must consider as well is that sometimes you project the wrong thing to those who are watching. Recently, a young lady called me to say that she had gotten information from someone who thought she was dating some other guy, and it turned out to just be because she had watched her interaction with the guy and concluded that something must be happening between two of them. Let that not be you. The next thing I want to say is this. When you're dealing with the opposite sex, be careful what you're discussing. You want to avoid inappropriate conversations, and nobody needs to tell you what those are. If you're meeting with people in a business setting, if it's a professional type circle you're trying to build, then keep your topics professional, or at least keep them progressive. You could be talking about national issues, for instance, but when you begin to degenerate into certain kinds of topics, and I do call it a degeneration, you open yourself out to any possibilities, depending on how the person you're speaking to then interprets and internalizes the things that you're saying. I also have to point out the fact that in your conversation, especially when there's an inappropriate topic at play, your body language could also be sending signals that you don't tend to realize. And then you find out at the other end of it that the person is responding in a way that sometimes you don't understand. And I'm going to share a couple of experiences very quickly. So I had a meeting I went to once where, for some reason, every time I looked across the table, this gentleman would lick his lips and then do a bit of a wink. I mean, I thought initially that perhaps this was a nervous twitch, until I realized that actually he was just coming on to me. And you know what I did? I just said something like, "Oh, it seems you're going to need a glass of water. I noticed you've been licking your lips quite a lot." He was quite embarrassed. And then he started to say, "Oh, no, sorry." Then he did ask for water, and after that refused to look me in the eye. But what if every time he did that, I had just smiled? I would have been sending a message like, okay, maybe we should have this conversation after this meeting. In another instance, this young man was also, every time I talked, he would do a bit of a dip and wink. And I was wondering, is he actually winking at me, or is this a nervous twitch? I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. And so once again, I said to him in that public space, we were sitting around the table, Do you have a nervous twitch? I notice you're winking quite a bit. I promise you he interpreted it as a nervous twitch and spent the rest of the meeting winking at everybody else. Again, the message is that you don't want to be that person that people have to correct. You also don't want to be that person who, even if nobody says anything, when they leave the room, you become the topic. Like, did you see the kind of behavior that was manifested in a professional setting? And then when you see that kind of behavior, also check your own responses, because like I said, if I hadn't addressed it, if I had started smiling or being a bit coy myself, I would have opened myself up to anything after that meeting was done. So let's pay attention to these small details: body language, conduct, conversations. And please, people, this is not always about the next person. It's really important that we ourselves are paying attention to any indirect cues that we might be given that are signaling the wrong thing, especially when dealing with the opposite sex. The last thing I want to share is this, and this is especially important if you are a couple that are in business together. It might be important for yourself and your spouse to agree what constitutes appropriate or inappropriate behavior when you're trying to build your networks. If your husband is not happy with you hugging men, then please don't, even if you don't mean anything by it. And this is exactly the same for men. If your wife is uncomfortable with a certain kind of behavior, maybe you're a bit touchy-feely with ladies and you don't think it's anything, but she finds it inappropriate, please pay attention. In the name of building a network, you don't want to sacrifice your marriage, do you? These are a few tips I thought I would share with you today in terms of how you can network with the opposite sex and still maintain your dignity and professionalism and grow real value-adding relationships without seeming to have compromised any of your standards or your values. I hope these have been useful to you. And if you have any further tips that we can all learn and grow from, I'd be happy to hear from you. Take care.